Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Divorce Couch. My name is Jackie and today we're going to be talking about the good, the bad and the ugly. And no, I'm not referring to anybody here. But firstly, what we'll do is just quickly go around and introduce ourselves again.
Hello, my name is Simone. I'm a divorce coach and I practice in Germany.
Hi, I'm Salma. I'm also a divorce coach and I'm based in London, UK.
And hi, I'm Claire and I'm a divorce coach based in Ireland and I live in the north coast of Ireland.
And as I said, I'm Jackie and I'm a divorce coach and I'm based in the north of England. So what exactly do we mean by the good, the bad and the ugly? Well, it's said that if you go through a divorce, that is the second most traumatic event you can go through in your lifetime after the loss of a loved one. So it follows that you're actually going to go through the same grief cycle. And in 1969, a woman by the name of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross developed what is known as the loss cycle. Now, it doesn't matter whether your breakup is a straightforward one or one that's more difficult. You are going to go through those same stages. And what we hope today is that what you can take away from this is a bit of an insight into what those stages are and how we actually managed our own roller coaster of emotions. And I think I'm probably right in saying that at the time we went through our divorces, we didn't know anything about the loss cycle. So if I can just throw it open and see who's going to kick off chatting first.
Okay, well, how about quickly just saying or introducing the stages. So the very first one is the one where we are in denial. So we are not really accepting that the separation is happening. The next one is the stage where we are really angry and where we are trying to reason and, make other people responsible or other circumstances. Why is that happening to us? It's a very emotional phase. So the energy is on the rise. Then the third one, the level, is where we are bargaining, where we are trying to find a way, not wanting to accept how it is unfolding. This morning I've just researched religious people then would go and turn to God very often and say, why don't we have some sort of agreement and then it will not happen. So basically you try to bargain with the situation. Then the fourth one is the energy level is now dropping. It is going what we call a depressive phase. This is a very low phase, which is not clinically, diagnostically depression. It just means we're at a very energetically low point. And once we've come out of that, the energy is picking up again, we're going into acceptance. And acceptance means that we are now having an outlook into the future, which does not mean that the stages do not come back in waves because we are still dealing with the breakup. And so it does not mean that it is a journey which has to go in these stages. They can be interchangeable. So, going back to one of you where you most likely were stuck, and that really brings back very intense memories.
I think one of the things I'd just like to add to what you said, Simone, is that It's not unusual for the two people within that relationship to be at different stages of that grief cycle, because especially if one party is the one that instigates a divorce, they may have been going through that grief cycle for quite a long period of time. So by the time they've taken that first step, they may already be at the stage of acceptance, where they've accepted the relationship is over, whereas it may come as a complete surprise for the other party. So sometimes that can be a real source of confusion for the party. If you're suddenly, you've come to the end of your relationship and you're seeing that your partner is sort of almost like moved on quite quickly, they're getting on with their life, and that can be quite painful to comprehend. but it's important to understand is that they may have already have been like transitioned through that grief cycle during the period where they were essentially, I suppose, officially still in the relationship, but maybe were mentally not really, in the relationship. So I think it's just important to highlight that, people can be at different stages. And as you said, we oscillate between, like, it's not a straight line. So we may wake up one day feeling, yeah, I really, come through this and I feel much better. And then, within an hour or the next morning, you wake up and you feel like you've gone back, 2 steps. So it is really about recognizing, that it's okay to feel like that.
Yeah, I think also, because everybody is a different persona, I think, in my journey, I, was part of a management team of an A&E department, and I had a busy life, and I probably known by my friends as somebody who gets stuff done, and they always say, ask a busy person, and, I would have done lots of things. And I think the difficulty with that is then when you go through a loss cycle, I mean, I didn't really understand the loss cycle when I was going through this. I just kind of went through things. And I think the concept, what I found very helpful, and again, it's a hindsight. A lot of my learning I've done in hindsight. I need to pick myself up faster and learn it, but sometimes that's just the way it works. I was probably very hard on myself because I didn't know how to ask for help, because everybody thought I was fine, because I didn't outwork the outworkings of the loss cycle outside my front door. I outworked a lot of it inside my front door because I didn't know how to do anything different. I didn't know how to be a different person from the person that I was. And so that's, in some ways, it takes longer to go through the process of the grief cycle, because it's only when you go through the different stages and you accept them and you don't have this resistance feeling. And the acceptance is, okay, it is what it is. And when you get to that point, the anger can dial down and the fear of the unknown can begin to go down, because then you think, well, and that, when I spoke to some of my friends afterwards, they were like, oh, we thought you were doing really well. We thought you were fine. But actually, I think the personalities of each person that's going through a journey of breakup and divorce, and this is, for me and my ex-husband and for the two parties, who we are as people in the world will impact how we go through the cycle, and also how hard the cycle is and how long it takes to go through it. If I had had help sooner, if I had been able to ask for it, I maybe would have come through some of it sooner. So those are just things to throw out for all of you listening to think about, and think about who are you and how do people perceive you. And it's totally okay to not be okay. I don't think I gave myself permission for that. Like, it is okay to not be okay. But I would have been very good at having compassion for somebody else, for a friend. So it's really hard for me. I didn't do that well. And I've learned that, but I didn't do it well for me.
Good. If we now tie it back to the topic, the good, the bad, and the ugly, it's speaking of your journey, is that then the bad part is basically not being able to open up, and compared to the ugly part or the good parts? How would you, I kind of like tie it in?
I think the bad part for me was it took me longer and it took more out of me because I didn't know how to open up. I just didn't know how to do it. The good part was the process taught me about myself. That's the really good part. I learned so much about myself. And I think when I then look at the word ugly and I think, what was the ugly? I think the ugly was the thoughts I said to myself in the process that I made it harder. Come on, pick yourself up. You're not good enough. Those are not good thoughts. They're not necessarily bad thoughts, but they are ugly thoughts. And they didn't define who I was. But that's what I was listening to. We listen more to ourselves than we do to other people because we're with ourselves all the time. So I think, does that make sense, Simone? Does that sort of clarify those areas?
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Salma or Jackie? What comes to mind when you think of the good, the bad, the ugly, and, tie it into the loss cycle?
Yeah, I can remember having what I referred to as duvet days. So days where, do you know what, I just didn't want to get out of bed. Stay there eating crisps or whatever. And a friend of mine at the time, she was also going through a divorce. And we would chat and we would say, oh, just having a duvet day. When is this going to end? And, I think understanding a little bit about the loss cycle, if I'd understood then, because as you said, Salma, you take a couple of steps forward and you think, yeah, I'm great, I'm going to, and that's the good part when you're thinking, yes, I'm great, and you're thinking very positively about the future and what it can look like. But then even in the same day, you can go back down again, and you can sort of move between those phases, all of them, even within one day. You can be up and down. But I think at the time, sort of a bad part, I suppose, for me was that I would feel very guilty then. For it's almost like I've gone back over.
Yeah.
And now I view things as, right, okay, instead of, if you have a good time followed by a downtime, that is actually still moving forward, because you are then going to have less of those downtimes and the gaps are going to get sort of greater. So I think for me, the good was the positives and the thinking, right, okay, a new life. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to be me, which actually I never felt I'd been. And yeah, the bad was those really down days, and the ugly, I suppose, feeling a bit lost as well at times, and scared. So you have this excitement for your future, but then you stop and it's like, it's scary. It's actually scary to take those steps forward. And I think understanding a bit about it and having some tools that you can use can actually help you through that. What's happening then. Yeah. How about you, Salma?
Yeah, I think looking back, one of the things that I think what I would consider the bad was really the fact that my divorce was in many ways my decision. It was something that I'd been thinking about for a very, I won't say long time, but it was, I suppose I felt like I instigated it. I took the first step. I drove the whole process. And that's largely because that's just who I am. When I'm doing something, I just get up and I do it. And so when I was hit by this grief cycle, I didn't give myself permission to be allowed to grieve, because what the voice in my head was saying to me, but you wanted this. So now why are you upset about this? You're the one who has done this. And I think for a very long time, I punished myself for feeling sad and for feeling, depressed and all of that low mood, and I couldn't understand why I was feeling, so low, considering this is what I wanted. Okay, let me rephrase it. It wasn't what I wanted, but it was a path that I had chosen. It was the way, it was what I knew that I had to do at some point. And I think once I allowed myself permission to grieve, that was when I started seeing the whole situation very differently. So when I wasn't allowing myself to grieve, I was just in a very angry place. I was angry at myself. I was angry at the situation. I was angry at my ex-husband. I was angry at everybody. I was angry at the world, and it was because I wasn't allowing myself to process those, because I didn't feel like I was entitled to those emotions. Definitely for me, the ugly part of the whole situation was the person that I became towards the end of my marriage. I didn't like the person that I had turned into. And that was one of the things that really pushed me to move forward, because I'd look at myself and I'd look at my behavior. Things had become quite acrimonious towards the last couple of months. And that's just not me. And it was almost as if I'd got to this point where I'd been sort of coasting, and then something had exploded and I just could not contain it. So everything became quite ugly and uncomfortable. And and the arguments and the screaming and the shouting escalated very quickly within our relationship in the last couple of months. And it was just not who I wanted to be. It wasn't the kind of I wasn't comfortable being that person. I didn't like that person that I was becoming, and I knew that I had to do something to salvage myself. And I think the good was, I do believe that it was the best thing for all four of us. And I talk about the children as well, that for me, it was, I had not grown up in a household with a lot of conflict. Not saying our household was perfect, but, I don't do well with conflict. And there were some situations which, looking back now, I feel incredibly ashamed of them having unfolded in front of the children, and what the children must have gone through at that point in time, being really young and having to witness, two adults constantly at each other's throats, and being able to take them out of that situation and taking myself out of that situation. I feel that's the good that came out of it, that now, 4 or 5 years later, I feel that we're all in a much better place. I think that it was the best decision that I made for myself and my ex-husband. He may choose to disagree. It's not something that we've discussed in recent years, but I really feel that both of us are much nicer people now.
Go on, sorry, Simone.
Yeah, I have, in preparation for today's talk, I was also, noting that when does it get ugly, and then it ties very quickly into things that get out of hand and out of control. Things get really ugly if we hold on to something and we have this expectation that we can still orchestrate or maneuver in a way that we feel it should go. But then, of course, and that's exactly what you all said, the moment, you put in another personality with their own agenda, with their own story, and with their own ideas and manual, it gets ugly. Because now you're no longer in unison. Now it breaks apart, and now everybody is then, pursuing their own idea of what they think how it should unfold. And that is then when very quickly it becomes ugly. That is totally what I also can relate to. And that also happened, I guess, on my ex-husband's side and on my side, because we were, and that again is what you said at the beginning, because we were on different levels. What you don't decide very rarely. Now let's sit down and let's, split up the marriage. It's just back and forth, and it just is so contrary in the waves of emotions that both parties are going through. And then you throw in control that you think you have that you actually don't. I think then it becomes incredibly tough. And then that's where ugliness comes in. Yeah.
I have to say that I was actually quite fortunate in my divorce, because we'd been together a long time, but we'd grown apart, and it was very much a case of we just knew we wanted to go in different directions. So we were able to sit down and have that conversation. And it was difficult, and there's lots of stresses and strains. But I was, with regard to my divorce, I was one of the very lucky ones where it just went through plain sailing, really. And we were able to sit down and talk about things and financial settlements and talk about the children. And there was never any issues with any of it. And I think because we both knew we were different personalities, and actually we weren't good for each other anymore living as husband and wife. So I was lucky there. But I think where you've got where you're both on a different page with it, that's when it becomes difficult. And I think having a little bit of an understanding that actually, if you are the one that's instigated the divorce, quite often by the time you get to that stage, I think, as we've all said, that you've probably gone through a fair amount of that cycle. And I know for me, I've probably gone through a lot of it before we did come to that point, and we probably both have gone through a lot of it before we came to the point of breaking up. But if you haven't, and it comes as a shock, then maybe just having a little bit of appreciation that your ex is also going through that cycle, and they may be in the angry stage. And if you can identify that when they're being difficult, at the outset, and you think, why don't they just do this? Why don't they just get on with their lives? Well, actually, because they're back in that anger stage. And, sometimes it can be helpful, I think, to just pause and think what your ex is also going through. I don't know how anybody else feels about that.
And I think one of the things that I always talk to my clients about is that it's not just the two people within that marriage that are going through the grief cycle. Actually, your children are going through the same emotions in different ways. So, sometimes we, even that can become quite difficult, the way the children are reacting and the way the children are, going through those emotions. But obviously, they're not equipped to, as sometimes even us adults aren't, to really deal with those emotions. Yeah, and I think just one of the things that I wanted to highlight is when you're going through the grief cycle, is to really, you don't have to do it by yourself. If you need to reach out, there's you can. For myself, the way that I dealt with the grief cycle once I accepted that that's what I was doing is, I did have a therapist. I did for a period of about a year when I was extremely low, and I needed to pick myself up. Every day was becoming a duvet day at one point during the divorce. And I did go to my doctor and speak to my GP and get some medication to help manage my mood, just so that I could function for the sake of the children. And I think it's really about identifying how you're going to maneuver that grief cycle. There's no shame in going to your GP and saying, I'm really not coping. I need some help. And whether that is, getting a therapist, getting medication, getting, an exercise routine in place. It's really about, looking to see what is going to aid you to get you through that period of your life.
Yeah. We have already almost, come to an end. Claire, is there something that you want to just add to what we have talked about today?
I think there was one thing that came to mind from what you were saying, Salma, and it was, I heard a phrase, and I didn't hear it until about a year or two ago, and I thought, oh, that is such a powerful phrase. And it was, I don't like the me that I am when I'm with you. And I thought, if I have read that a long time ago, would that have resonated something and caused me to start to look to notice? Because I think if something is going wrong, then we change and adapt to the circumstance. And I think that's a very powerful phrase. And it's in the line of what we're talking about in all of our videos, is it always starts with noticing. And just notice who you are with the people in your world, regardless of whether it's a partner, might be a friend or a work colleague or something. But that is a powerful phrase. Do you like who you are when you're with X or Y? So that would be my takeaway with that one.
Yeah. So what is the takeaway of today? So I am hearing from all four of us that growth is a good thing. So if we are looking at the loss cycle, which is a growth cycle, it begins at one point. We are having different emotional parts. And then at the end, it's the acceptance. And this is where growth begins. The bad is the in-between. It's the emotions that we are experiencing. And it is important that you allow the emotion to be there. Don't bottle them up. Don't suppress them. They will be coming up at another point in life. So this is going to be your friend. It's not all being rosy and daisies. It's going to be sad, and it's going to make you angry, whatever stage you are at. So embrace it and know it. Anticipation is a big thing. And the ugly is when we are giving away the power. This is especially when we are in the anger stage. We are giving away the power and we feel we are out of control. And that is when we become very angry. And this is how we then slow down the growth process. We are at the end of our video, giving you again in bulletin points what we feel is the takeaway from today's episode, so you can reread and refer to it. And don't forget to educate yourself on it on Google. Google is a brilliant place. Whatever you feel you want to know more about, just look at it. Look the Lost Cycle up and dive deeper into it. So for now, I'm saying goodbye and see you next time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bye.
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 Bye.